Howdy! You're listening to the Breakaway Podcast, a Bible study recorded on the campus of Texas A&M. Thanks for listening and enjoy the talk.
Well, when I was in 5th grade, I went to a friend's birthday party, and his dad took us to a place called Photon. Now, I imagine none of you know what Photon is, but you've probably all been to places called like Laser Tag or Laser Rage or somewhere where you run around and shoot each other with lasers. Well, this was back in the 80s when lasers were just coming out. This is like the grandpa of your modern laser experience, all right? Our only point of reference was Star Wars. So as we drove there, we're like, are we going to shoot a hole in each other? Am I ready for this emotionally, right? But as we went, we had drank a bunch of Jolt Cola, which was billed as Coke with twice the sugar, twice the caffeine. So by the time we got there, we were in a full-blown sugar rage, and we were like, let's just do it, right? And they said, whoa, no, you can't just go in there. You got to watch the instructional video. So they piled a bunch of us into this little room, turned off the lights, and shut the door, which when you're 10 is kind of fun, but then instantly creepy. We were like, ooh, okay, it's really dark in here, all right? But we didn't have long to wait because suddenly this huge metallic female head came moving towards us. And she began to speak in this creepy robotic voice, and she was introducing us to Photon, but also kind of intimidating us. She was like, welcome to Photon. You cannot handle the experience. And we were like, I believe you. All right. And when we walked out, we weren't sure how to feel about it, but then they whisked us down into this locker room where there were these guys that were probably your age, college guys, and they were just trying to like relive the high school dream of football, right? They're trying to fire us up, and they're putting all this gear on us, like this unnecessary amount of shoulder pads and helmets and Kevlar. And the whole time they're like, are you ready for this, little man? And at that point, I'm like, I just don't know anymore, right? And I remember all in a moment, this big door opened, and these sirens went off, and there before me was this massive 2-story complex, and they said, go! And I can tell you now, because I've dealt with it emotionally, that first game, I did not see another human being. Because instantly I realized that half the arena had colors in it that were the same colors as mine. So I went running to that corner of the room and just kind of hid in a corner, right? And every now and again I would sneak out, but as soon as I crossed over enemy lines, that woman's voice would come back out, and she would be like, intruder alert, intruder alert. And I'm like, she is talking about me. She's talking about me, and I can't do this, right? And so when we got done, you walk out, and they have those TVs with the leaderboards to let you know how you did. And I saw my name, and it had negative 100 points. I'm like, how did I get the negatives, right? So I went and talked to my buddies, and they're like, dude, it was awesome. Remember I was shooting that guy, and we ran over there, and you see me roll? And they're talking, and I was like, yeah. And they were like, Ben, where were you? And I'm like, I was on a whole nother level, y'all. But I was kind of embarrassed, and I realized, you know what? This is Photon, man. You go big or you go home, right? This isn't some kid's game, all right? Roll out, son. And so when the next game came around, I decided I'm not holding back. So when it started up, sirens went off, doors open. I didn't even try to hide. I'm just walking around. I'm knocking fools over, shooting them. I don't care what team you're on, all right? We walk out, look up at the leaderboard, negative 1,000. And I'm like, that is not progress, right? And we only had one game left, and so I'm looking up at the board, and everyone's got their code names up there. It's like the Renegade and Wolverine, and me and my buddies are like Confused and Scared and Buttercup, or, just awful. But there's a guy whose name is the Hunter, and he has like 1 million points. And so I'm like, I've got to find the Hunter, all right? So I start looking around the room, and there in the back is this junior high guy, and he's like leaning against the wall, and he's got like his disciples around him, right? And I'm like, that's got to be him. And so I walk up to him, and I'm like, excuse me, are you the Hunter? And he's like, yes. And I'm like, I'm Buttercup. I don't know if you can see the negative, but I don't know what's happening, right? And I'll never forget, he looked at me, and he was like, well, have you shot the enemy module yet? And I went, what? And he looked at me, and he goes, son, do you not even know the point of this game? And I said, well, clearly I'm missing something, right? And he said, the whole point of the game is we're on a team. We're supposed to work together and navigate through enemy lines, supporting one another. When you get to the back, there's an enemy module on the wall, and as you shoot it, it blows up, and that's how you win. How do you not know that? And I'm like, that metal lady didn't say anything about that. And I'll never forget, he looked at me, and he said, well, then you follow me, and I'll show you how to play this game. So the last game comes up. Sirens go off, doors open. Hunter goes running in. Hunter's posse is behind him. There's Buttercup right on their heels, right? And sure enough, we're moving, man. We're covering each other, doing signals, all right, all kinds of stuff, supporting one another, moving behind enemy lines. We get there. There's this big module on the wall. I start shooting at it. It blows up, and we win. I go outside. Buttercup's got 1,000,000 points. I win the game, right? Now, why tell you that? For this reason. It was a tragedy to waste 2 games of Photon, right? It is, in all seriousness, a much greater tragedy to waste a life. And let me say it this way. You can be the most conservative, never drink, never smoke, study on Thursday night, Friday night, Saturday night kind of person. Or you can be the most drinkingest, smokingest, sleep with anybodyest person on Northgate. And at either extreme, totally waste your life if you don't know the point of the game. And the strength and the happiness of a man and of a woman is seeing the way God is going and saying, I'm going that way too. And so my hope for you tonight as you step into this semester is, I don't want you to live these little stories and miss the big invitation that God set in front of you to join His story. Because this is an exciting chapter in life. College is amazing, right? I mean, there is no other time in life where you're this incredible mix of adult and adolescent all in one. Like, at no other point in life would you answer the question, what did you do today, with something like, well, I studied physics in the afternoon, and then later that night I wrote a huge slip and slide, right? Like, that just never goes together at any other time. It's a unique chapter, and if you're in the class of 2017, the high school chapter, there you are. The high school chapter's over. Shut the book, close it, it's done being written. There's nothing left to do with high school but look out and say, how did I do? And some of you crushed it, owned it, it was amazing. Some of you, well, you're here now. And we're thrilled, and you get a do-over. And this is an exciting season of life. But let me tell you something. This isn't the first chapter in your life, and Lord willing, it won't be the last. And the question I want to ask tonight is, if you've got a story of your life, and this is a big, exciting chapter where you'll figure out what I'm good at, what I'm gifted at, passionate about, some great friends, maybe meet the one, you've got all this exciting stuff in front of you. If this chapter is a big story of you, what's the plot of your story? What's the meaning of your life? What's the point? And my hope for you tonight is I want you to have a great story. You want to have a killer midlife crisis. I mean, a monumental meltdown in your 40s. Don't have a good answer to that question. And that's what a midlife crisis is. It's that you look up and a whole bunch of life's behind you, and it's not that you felt like you missed experiences like, oh, I should have slept with more people, or oh, I should have studied harder. It's not that. It's that you look back and go, where am I? And where's all this going? And what's the meaning of this? What's the big narrative? That's what you're searching for. What have I joined my life to that has value beyond me? What's the meaning of my story? What's the plot? That's what will haunt you at your 40s. And I want to save you from going crazy in your 40s. And so back it up 2 decades right now. What's the point? What's the plot of your story? And here's the good news tonight. You don't have to write it. You don't have to be the author of the story. When I say that, I go, the pressure I see on your generation, really more than any I've ever seen before, that causes so much stress and anxiety in your generation, is you're being pressed to be the author of the story. That they're coming to you, an older generation, saying, there's no narrative, there's no plot, there's no story that you've joined into. There's just, you come up with it. You determine the purpose. You determine the conflict and how it's resolved. You determine it. And so as you look to the older generation of going, what's the adventure I'm in? What am I being called to? What you get is a Socratic method. That doesn't make a great story. We wouldn't have read Harry Potter if he showed up and said, hey, were my parents wizards? I don't know. What were they to you? Hey, is Voldemort evil? I don't know. Is he evil to you? Why are these people dying? Are they? Just tell me. Tell me the setting. Tell me the characters. Tell me the problem. Tell me how it's solved. And then let me join my life to it. Let me be a hero in the story. Let me be a character that makes a contribution to the story. But don't put the pressure of saying you got to make it up because you don't know it. You didn't start the story. It went on before your parents, before your grandparents, and it won't end with you. But there is a big A author, and he is writing a story. And the joy tonight is you get to link up with that. To say there's a bigger world than me. But I get to step in and be a valuable part of it, of something God is doing in the universe. I want to be a part of that, to take my little story and throw it into his big story and let my little story have more value than it could have ever had on its own. That's what I want for you. And I'm here to tell you there is a story. There is a story. And over the next couple weeks, we're going to look at the book of Exodus together. And I'll tell you why we're looking at the book of Exodus, because the book of Exodus is epic. It's epic. I mean, it has all the classic pieces of an incredible story, right? There's a status quo that's met with a huge problem. There's a villain that the people of God are living life, but they're enslaved by a villain who's a genocidal king. And in the midst of that conflict, what happens? An unlikely hero arises. He has a supernaturally strange birth, but then he disappears into the wilderness for generations. And as the pain reaches a fever pitch, there in the midst of their tension, he emerges from the wilderness to set them free. And as the tension rises, he leads them to the brink of what looks like destruction. The Red Sea in front of them, Pharaoh behind them. But what looks like certain death, what? Becomes a pathway to freedom. And you see the book of Exodus has these great pieces of captivity. And then a redeemer, a rescuer that gets them out and leads them into a new life, right? And what's great about Exodus is not just that it's a great story, one of the greatest of all human stories. And it's not just that it's a cool part of God's story, it's that the book of Exodus is a microcosm of God's big story. That story of captivity and liberation through a redeemer and led into a new life, that's the human story. That's ours. That the Bible says that we are slaves to sin. We're enslaved. Jesus, as he moved out into a community of people, told a group of them that, hey, you're slaves. And they said, nobody owns us. We're not slaves. And he says, anyone who sins is a slave to sin. He says, you're not free. You're not all that you're meant to be under God. 1 John says the whole world is under the evil one. There's something evil in this place. If you don't believe me, just read the newspaper. I just opened up CNN the other day, and there were 20 headlines that were all stunningly horrible. Of rape of children, and molestation of college girls, and chemical weapons used on masses of people. And you read all this, and you can't just go, well, what we need is education. Education is awesome, and I'm a fan of it, and I'm glad you're here to get it. But there's a deeper stain in us that a textbook won't fix. And the reality is we're a mess and we're captives to sin. And the story of the Bible is in the midst of our captivity, God didn't send a motivational speaker. God sent a rescuer. That Jesus came through a miraculous birth. Right? That Jesus came in obscurity, an unlikely hero. And he came to rescue us, not what looked like certain death, but he faced certain death. He died. He who knew no sin became sin for us on that cross, taking all the penalty and payment of it, so that we might be rescued from the dominion of darkness and brought into the kingdom of the beloved Son, that we could come to know God, our Maker, and be invited into his story of redemption, be a part of his redeeming work. That's our story. And so as we read a story of Exodus, it's a little picture of the big human story, and it's a big picture of our little individual stories. It's a macrocosm and a microcosm. It's like a mid-crow. Because it's a picture of you too. That all of us are captives to some broken things in us that we can't fix. And yet for many of us, God in his mercy put us in a situation, maybe with a parent or a friend, or in a situation like this where someone told us about a Jesus who will forgive anybody. And as you came to know him, he brought you free, didn't destroy you, didn't make you a slave. He made you free to be who you were meant to be under God, right? And so it's our story. So as we read the story, we'll see us. And you go, well, Ben, that's great, but I don't understand what this has anything to do with the fact that I'm going to be in class tomorrow. and I'm going to get another syllabus and live life. So you're saying God has a big story that we can follow Jesus and know him? Okay, but what does that mean for me tomorrow? Like, I don't understand how that connects to me right now as I'm just trying to figure out where my classroom is, right? Or if he likes me or not. Well, let me tell you as we close, there's three things that every story needs. And the book of Exodus has them, the gospel story has them, and your story needs them. There's an author, and there's a hero, and there's a cause. And the first thing the book of Exodus has that we need to get our minds around is there's an author. And the reason we need to know that is because knowing that there's an author of life gives our life meaning. It's interesting, we didn't read the whole intro of Exodus, but if you read the first part, God is strangely absent in Exodus 1 and 2. He's not mentioned a lot as he is later in the sense of being really active. And the writer did that on purpose. It's because that's how life can feel sometimes. It just feels like we're living life and we're just the chronological next thing. We had grandparents and parents, now it's us. And we just do stuff, right? And we show up, and for them, it's like, hey, I'm working in Pithom today. Are you working in Ramses? Rock on, build some bricks, bro. And for us, we're like, I think I'm an engineer. I think I'm a teacher. And we just kind of live life, right? And we try to eke out something happy in the midst of it. And yet the reality is the author does something so crazy. He's just giving you the mundane details of life. They moved to Egypt. They did well, but then a king came and oppressed them. They became slaves. They got to build some bricks. But then he says in verse 7, he says, but the people of Israel were fruitful and increased greatly, and they multiplied and grew exceedingly strong so that the land was filled with them. So he says, while they were slaves, they were fruitful and multiplied. Which you go, oh, great, they had kids, rock on. But no, the author's doing something there. He takes language straight from Genesis 1. And he says, while they are there in Egypt building bricks, God, when he fashioned them, had a purpose for them to be fruitful and multiply. And does that mean have kids? Yes. But it also means to take your gifts and abilities and do more with them to be a blessing to the world. And it says, while they're in the midst of the mundane, they're fulfilling the reason God created them. And then that same language shows up later in Genesis as God talks about why he saves his chosen people, that he saves us that we would be fruitful and we would multiply, that we would take the gifts God gave us and use them to be a blessing to the world, part of his redemptive work. And so what's fascinating is as you read this, you go, they're just going through the mundane, they're building bricks, but wait a second, it's not just the mundane. They're fulfilling the purposes for which they were made. They're fulfilling the purposes for which God created them and called them to himself. That there is an author of life, and even in the midst of the mundane, if I know there's an author, then I know my story's not random. I know my story isn't just me making up stuff. That I am under an author who's writing a story that is good, and there's purpose to everything I do, even in these moments of preparation. And as you get your mind around that, man, that makes every moment shot through with meaning. And so we don't read a Harry Potter book where Harry goes, well, I'll just study wizardry. I don't know, maybe I can get a good wizardry job at like a carnival or something, you know. No, study wizardry. Why? To rescue the people from bondage, to be a solution to the great problems. You don't read a Hunger Games where she's like, I want to get better with this arrow because, there's a good market for beaver pelts, and I just figured it'd be a good time to jump in on that. No! Be great at it. Why? So you can liberate a nation. And for you, like, well, I guess I'm going to be a petroleum engineer. There's a lot of petroleum in the world today. Fine, but don't let that be it. Don't let that be your whole story. I got a degree and moved to the suburbs. That's not one the grandkids are going to want to sit around and say, tell it again, Granddad. Now hear this. You may get a degree, and I hope you do, because the world needs smart and wise people. And you may move to the suburbs, and that's not a bad thing. But there's got to be more than that. Let it have a beautiful, eternal purpose. That I'm here and I'm taking my little gifts and throwing them out there to be a part of God's redemptive work. Because that's what he made me to do. There are petroleum engineers that are out there doing amazing things, providing for us, and they help pay for this. And there's a lot of people that are doing a lot of different things that help fund this so that you can hear the gospel. They are taking their job and their skills and their abilities and they're saying, it's got to be about more than me. It's got to be about changing the next generation. I spoke with a friend the other day that wants to get into politics, and I think that's great. She's an educated, sharp young lady, and she said, I think it's time for me to become a state senator. And I said, why? And she said, because there's too many girls caught in sex trafficking, and someone needs to be a voice for them. And so I'm going to be a voice to set these little girls free in the state Senate. And I said, that's a good reason to be there. That's a good reason. And when you realize your story has an author, and he's writing a beautiful story, that's when you engage the culture and you become an agent of change. Your life gets shot through with meaning. And the second thing is the story needs a hero. And when you know that there's a hero, that fills your heart with hope. Not just meaning that my life's not meaningless, it has purpose, but there's also hope. How can Buttercup be so confident in the face of Humperdinck? You do know Princess Bride, right? As she looks into the face of marrying this awful human being who plans to kill her that night, she looks in his face and says with defiance, I know my Wesley will come for me. How can she be so confident when she's bound and in a horrible situation? Because she knows when Wesley faced certain death under the dread pirate Roberts, he could get out of that, and so nothing that a Prince Humperdinck can throw at him is going to shut Wesley down. Look out, son. It may look bad now, but my team's going to win, and she has hope even in the midst of difficulty. It's fascinating as you read this first passage in Exodus. You can read it and just see life's getting hard. But what's beautiful is it reads it says, the more they were oppressed, the more they multiplied. God blesses his people by having them grow. And it says Pharaoh tried to destroy them. And as Pharaoh tries to destroy them, God says, no, my purpose is for them to grow. So evil may try to suppress them, but our God wins. You try to suppress them, the more they grow. And so then Pharaoh goes to the midwives and says, hey, when these Israelite women give birth, kill the males. They fear God and won't do it. And so God blesses them with children. He tries to oppress them so they won't grow. And through the oppression, they grow. He tries to get the midwives to kill the babies, so God gives the midwife babies. So he says, throw those babies in the Nile, and so what's the next story? Moses is put in the Nile, and he's sent down to the doorstep of Pharaoh to be raised by his kid on his dime, so that when Moses grows up, his name is drawn out because he draws his people out of slavery. God takes everything this evil king does and reverses it for good for his people, to the very point that even trying to destroy Moses leads him to raise Moses, who will certainly destroy him in all his work. That's incredible. That's the hero of the story. You're not the hero, and I'm not. In the book of Exodus, God is the hero. And as they see God working, they say, even when it's bad, his purposes prevail. And let me tell you something. For you, some of you, you're here with a lot of excitement about college, but you're here with a lot of fear. And you're here with a lot of fear because you know your tragic flaws. And you're so scared you're going to be a tragic hero. That other people may leave this heroic stories, but you know you got that thing in you. That darkness in you, that depression in you that sinks you. That lust in you you can't control. That fear in you that dominates you. So many of us, you've got something in you, and you know these shortcomings in me, this pain I've suffered and the brokenness it did in me, these horrible things in me, they're going to sink me. But when you know that there's a hero of the story, you have hope even in the midst of the darkness. Because he purposes good even through pain. And here's the beautiful thing. They cry out for God's mercy at the end of chapter 2, but he was raising up Moses at the beginning of chapter 2. Before you even cry out for rescue, God's already sent the rescuer. And you may have some brokenness and tragic things and sad things in your heart that you're so scared will sink me. And let me tell you something, they might, but God's in the business of sending a hero. Not a Moses, but the greater Moses, Jesus Christ, who sets us free and who looks into your face and says, I don't care what kind of sin you're going through, but he works all things for the good of those who love him and are called according to his purpose. And when you trust him, he's the hero of your story, and no evil dominates you in the end. And you may weep for a season, but your rescue is coming. And the last thing I'll say is this, is that a great story needs a cause. And what's wonderful is that when we understand the cause God's given us, it fills our life with joy. When we know there's a God over us, everything has meaning. When we know he sent a hero for us, we have hope. No fears, no pain, no suffering, no sin will dominate us. And we know that he has a cause for us, it fills us with joy. They cry out for rescue from slavery. And over again, it talks about that word slavery. It's interesting, the word slavery is the word service, but it can also mean the word to worship. And so it's interesting, when God sets them free later in the book of Exodus, he doesn't set them free to do whatever they want. He says, I'm set you free from being a slave to Pharaoh to set you free to worship me. He says, I'm not setting you free to just do whatever you want. I'm setting you free to be in service to me. It's a master exchange program. That's what I'm doing. Out of service of a bad king into service of a great king, right? And some of you go, well, I don't want to serve anybody. I just want to be free. But here's the thing. The book of Romans says about us that of our early parents, when we sinned against God, it says that God let humanity go its own way. And you know what the next thing it says is? They worshiped and served created things. That if God sets you free and says, do whatever you want, we naturally begin to serve created things. We orient our lives under something to be like God, to bless us, to guide us, help us make decisions, to orient us to the world. All of us in our hearts are made to orbit something that gives us meaning. The problem is, created things don't make good gods. And Pharaoh took so much from the Israelites and gave so little back. And so many of you are orienting your lives under a master that's not good. You make your master perfection, like Lauren. When you can't add up, it gives you back despair. You make your master fame. Fame will leave you in a heartbeat, right? Watch your celebrities. Watch what happens when the spotlight leads them. They go crazy. Right? Fame is a fickle master, and she'll drop you in a heartbeat. She's a bad God. Some of you have made your lusts your master. How do I satisfy these lusts? But I've talked to so many people that as they live their lives there, it doesn't give, it starts to take. Take love, take relationships, take freedom. You become an addict to that which you thought would set you free. Created things make bad gods. And so God in his mercy says, I want to pull you out of that, and I want to make you a servant to me. And by serving me, that sets you free. Look at Lauren's face in the video. She's not like, now I got to serve God. No, it's a joy to serve God when I know what kind of God he is. That he's one who loves me and came for me and sent a hero to rescue me. That's an easy God to follow. So I don't want you to be Boromir, that spent his whole life seeking what? Selfish self-advancement. And it wasn't until the moment of his death, as he laid there bleeding out, he looked up into the face of the true king, Aragorn. And at that moment he realized, I spent my whole life chasing self-advancement, and it got me nowhere. And it took that very moment of death for him to look up in that face and go, but I would have followed you to the gates of Mordor itself. My brother, my captain, my king. Too late, he looks up and realizes the best life I could have possibly lived would have not to try to selfishly create my own story, but to jump into your big story, because you're my king, but not just a king, you're a captain that leads me, and not just a captain, a brother who loves me. And when you realize that God says, I want you to serve and worship me, why? Because I'm the God who came to you as a rescuer in Jesus Christ. Lived for you, died for you, rose to save you. When you realize that's the God we're talking about, a rescuer, you can joyfully follow behind him. And that's what he offers us, the joy of being his. St. Augustine, when he was a college student, his main goal was to be awesome as an orator, because that's where the money was. And as he got famous, he found that his great joy was sex. And he went and he got as much fame and as much sex as his city would offer him. And he realized the more he did that, the more his soul shrunk. And he saw some people living these glorious, beautiful lives, caring for the poor. And he realized, I've got to come to God if God's going to set me free from this. But he was so scared to trust God, he didn't want to do it. Until finally he got to the point where he realized this is so broken. And he finally submitted and said, okay, Jesus, if you're a forgiver, forgive me. If you're a king, lead me. If you're a captain, I'm following you. And he wrote this in his journal 2,000 years ago. He said, how sweet all at once was it for me to be rid of those fruitless joys I had once so feared to lose. You drove them from me, you who are the true sovereign joy. You drove them from me, and you took their place, you who are sweeter than all pleasure. O Lord, my God, my light, my wealth, and my salvation. So many of us are afraid to trust God because we're afraid he'll kill our dreams and ruin our lives. But let me tell you something. If Moses had just lived his dreams, he would have just been a really rockin' sheep herder in Midian. And God says, no, I want you to be a part of changing history. If Mary would have had her dreams, she would have just been a normal bride in a normal marriage. And God said, no, I want you to be the mother of Jesus. God has a bigger dream. Yours is too small. Throw your story into the big story. That's where you'll find meaning. That's where you'll find hope. That's where you'll find joy. It's with him, your brother, your captain, your king, Jesus. That's my hope for you.
Welcome to the Breakaway Podcast. My name is Brent, and I'm the production coordinator with Breakaway Ministries, and I'm sitting here with Ben Stewart, and we just kicked off the fall 2013 semester in Reed Arena.
That's right.
And it was a blast.
Man, it was incredible. You know, it's wild because you do all the preparation to house the people, but then for me, I always do this every year of going, okay, Lord, I don't know if you're done with Breakaway, if maybe it'll just be the staff there and we'll have a great prayer time, you know, whatever. But it's when they all come pouring in, it's unbelievable. And we had more students than ever in Reed Arena, just absolutely packing them in. And it's just a crazy day, man. There's more freshmen here than ever. If you're not tracking with A&M attendance numbers, let me just let you know that there are 10,000 newly registered students at Texas A&M. So just wrap your head around that. 10,000 new students here. So the school is exploding, and traffic to get to Breakaway, we had people telling us later, was backed up all the way to Texas Avenue, the front of the campus, which creates some logistical challenges for us. But what it equaled was a lot of excitement, and God really met us there, man. Mm-hmm. Unbelievable.
Yeah, I thought the process was great. I thought the people we worked with made it really stress-free. We love the Reed Arena staff. Thankful for those guys and girls. And it was a great night. Mm-hmm. I had a blast doing it, and I just love what I get to do with my life and what we get to do with our lives serving college students.
Absolutely. Well, and if you missed it, Lauren, one of our volunteers, gave her testimony, and it's a video available on our website. Yep. Unbelievable. And we got a sweet email from a girl, came to know Christ, not even from my talk, just hearing the testimony of this girl. She's heard her story. And so check out Lauren's story. Jeff Johnson and Jordan led worship, did amazing. Their new CD just came out on iTunes. Number 2 most downloaded Christian album, right under Mandisa. Ironically entitled Overcomer. I didn't you know that? So she overcame not only whatever struggles, but also Jeff Johnson. But it's not a competition. But we were just giving Jeff a hard time. But amazing music that he's writing. So good. And but even with that, we've said as a staff, all those component parts, hey, great band, hey, great video, hey, good talk, hey, good production, great sound. The added up pieces of all that don't equal a changed life. They don't. And it has to be the Lord moving. And my favorite thing is I just really felt like he met us there, Brent. I felt like it was so good.
I agree. Yeah, it was
so
fun.
Good.
And you kicked off a new series in Exodus.
That's right.
It was great. It was a talk on living in a bigger story than just ourselves. And do you have any more to add right now?
Well, Always, Brent. But I will resist re-preaching the whole talk, but we did start a series in Exodus, and I'm excited about that. And obviously, we're not going to cover every word in Exodus. You picked that up from this talk. We just touched down. And there's so much going on in the first 2 chapters that we didn't get to. But I'll say one thing about Exodus and one thing about just living in a bigger story, and that'll be sort of the extra features, bonus stuff on that. About Exodus, we'll pick up some of Exodus 2 in the next talk, but one of the coolest things that's happening in Exodus 1 and 2 is, number one, he's just letting you know Exodus is not its own book. It's a chapter in the unfolding story of God. And one of the coolest ways you see that, we actually don't translate into English, which is a super bummer. Like the first word in the book of Exodus in Hebrew is just it looks like a little squiggle line, but what it means is and. And so the first word is, and these are the names of the Son. And you don't start a sentence with and is a conjunction. What do conjunctions do? They link parts of a sentence or an idea or 2 ideas. And so what they're showing you is Exodus is a chain and a link. It's literally like you finish Genesis and you turn the page and you go, and these are the names that it keeps going. And what he's trying to communicate is the story's still moving. And those first several verses in Exodus, a lot of them are verbatim from Genesis. And what the author is trying to show you is this is one story. This is one story of what God is doing. And he did it through Abraham, and Abraham's gone. Then he did it through Isaac and through Jacob, and now he's doing it through you. And the idea that's meant to communicate to the younger generation who was getting this book, not the ones who lived it, but their kids or the ones who were reading this, the message to them was, and the story's rolling on and it's your turn. And I just love that we're not just the chronological next thing. There's a big story unfolding. And in chapter 2 of Exodus, God says, I'm going to move in the lives of this generation of Israelites, and I'm going to do it to fulfill my promise to Abraham. So it's not just that God's story is still going, but it's God's story of redemption, the promise he made to Abraham of, I'm going to bless you, and through you bless the whole world. And so your kids, they're a part of that. And Galatians tells us we're a part of that if we're in Christ. We're the seed of Abraham, and God's going to bless us and help us so we can be a blessing to the world. The story is rolling on. The theme of it is the promise of God of restoration and redemption through Jesus, through his Redeemer. And it's a story that we're a part of. So that's why we keyed off that idea of being a part of a bigger story, because that is screaming through the subtext of Exodus 1 and 2. So that's part of where that came from. The only other thing I would say about story, and this is a bit like random and side note, it was all the stuff in my notes I just cut because of time, but there's a guy, I think it was in the 1970s, named Joseph Campbell, and he wrote a book about what he called the monomyth, or the hero's journey. And what he meant by the monomyth is he was looking through ancient literature and finding that all the great stories that persisted followed a similar pattern. A status quo that's not great but not bad, a crisis, an unlikely hero. They go through a period of trials till a climactic moment where they overcome evil, and then there's a resolution that's not just the status quo but a heightened status quo. And then you see that through stories, and you look at our movies now and you go, they all follow, all the good ones follow that. You know what I mean? So Star Wars follows it, Harry Potter follows it, Hunger Games follows it, The Matrix follows it to a T. And all the stories we love as human beings follow the monomyth, the hero's journey, Lord of the Rings. They all follow it. It's weird when you start seeing that. And what's interesting is Joseph Campbell's idea was, yeah, it's all through like different cultures, different myths. That same elements all show up. Weird, huh? And that's the end of it. It's like, isn't that weird? You know? And just recently, Joss Whedon, who was the director of The Avengers, wrote that. He's not a believer in God, but he said, someone asked me if I had anything like faith, and he said, I have faith in the narrative. He said, I believe there's a narrative out there that's bigger than me and alive and will work itself out. And so it's interesting for even him of saying, I don't believe in a God. I believe there's a big story out there. And even you look at the modern Avengers movies, you know, you look and you're like, how did the movie of Thor go? Thor, what does he do? He gives his life, lets himself be destroyed by this robot thing, right? Why? So he can overcome death, be declared with power to be the son of the All-Father and ride out to rescue his people, right? Captain America goes down with the ship, sacrificing himself to save the people, and then rises to help a new generation. You know, Iron Man hurls himself into the big gaping hole in the sky, sacrifices himself, and yet manages to live on to bless. You know, you look and you go, Harry Potter gives his life to destroy evil and rises again. And you go, what are all these stories? Why are they so woven into the human heart? They're woven in because God put them there, because that's our story. All these stories derive their power from the one true story. They do. And so the Bible's not just picking up on that. The Bible starts with in the beginning. And we long for a hero because God is our hero, and he's brought his hero, Jesus. And God has done this story and over again, so that when you get to the New Testament, he says Moses was just a picture of Jesus. He's saying all these heroes of the past were just a picture of Jesus. And over again they are. And you look at our modern myths. Harry Potter, she got inspired by the Gospel of John. You know? Superman. I mean, even they're not even believed. They're marketing it to churches. Why? Because they go, he's a thinly veiled Christ figure. You know, William Wallace is crucified to save his people and bring them freedom. We all key off this Jesus story of redemption because it's our story. Because it's our story. So our hearts scream to be a part of something bigger than just, I made a little money and died painlessly. But our culture pushes us to that. But so I was just trying to call people to see what's already in them. And the fact that the reason it's in you is because God put it there. And he's calling us to something bigger. So anyway, that's a bit meandery, but I just had to get it out there.
Yeah. Well, that's very helpful. Thank you for that insight, Ben.
Yeah.
And it makes me really excited for where we're going with the rest of Exodus and really the rest of the semester, looking at what our role is in this bigger story.
It's good, man. It'll be fun.
Well, there was another big announcement on Tuesday that if you just listen to the podcast, you don't know about. And so I want you to talk about it a little bit, something that's coming up this semester.
I can. Brent is getting married. And that's...
Yep.
Is that not the one you were thinking of?
I was thinking about that one. I never stopped thinking about that one. But I was thinking more of a breakaway context.
Oh, sure. Oh, okay. Well, sorry, ladies. Brent's getting married. And that's happening. And we're excited about that in just a few weeks.
Yeah.
But the one you're talking about is... It actually started with a problem, and it's the problem we're running into that who would have thought we ever would, and that is these first couple breakaways, we're hitting limits inside Reed Arena. And you're like, who says that? Who's like, we're running out of room in this basketball arena for a Bible study? And we don't say that in arrogance. Like, look at us. As a staff, we're very aware of that the aggregate pieces of our gifts and abilities don't equal anything worth the attention of that many people.
Yeah.
We're just not that good. But our message of Jesus Christ, who came as a hero to rescue, that is worth the attention of the whole world. It is. And God is doing something, and he's doing it here, and we're so grateful to be a part of it. And so we say it from that place and with that heart, but with a logistical problem of going, man, there's more people than ever in this town. They are hungry for this. We're running out of space. What are we going to do? And so we got pressed into a situation where we don't have Reed for 2 weeks in September. And so we're going to go to Kyle Field again in September on the 17th, which may be our last time to use it for a while once the renovations start. But we just started asking the question, okay, if Kyle's going to be shut down for a couple of years, if Reed, we're hitting limits, we're going to keep using Reed. We love it. It's home base for us. But is there somewhere we can go that would give us room to reach more people? And we realized there's only one space on campus, and it happens to be right in the dead center. And it happens to be a big, wide open field called Simpson Drill Field.
Yeah.
There's no chairs in Simpson. There's no plugs, right? But what there is a space the size of 4 football fields that sits right next to the Memorial Student Center, that's surrounded by dorms, that is literally the center of the campus. And the first time we met in Kyle Field, people on Northgate across campus could hear the lyrics we were singing. And that's with all the sound barriers. Now we're going to be in Simpson Drill Field. There's no barriers. It is out there. And we're just so enthusiastic about that. We're like, it started with how do we solve a problem? It started with, it's a big problem that's coming soon. And it ended with, this is a chance to get the gospel out further than we ever have before. So God does that kind of stuff. He creates crisis for his glory. And we look and go, that's what this is. He is pushing us outside the walls, and we're going for it, man. So we want everyone to be there. Mm-hmm. We want people to hear it that have never heard the name Breakaway, but they're going to hear us. Mm-hmm. And we want them to make their way there. And so if you can make it on September 10th, so that's not this Tuesday, but the next one, it's happening, baby, right before the Alabama game. You can come in a couple days early. Yep. Come with us. Bring a blanket to sit on. Bring a picnic basket. But it's happening, man. Breakaway on Simpson Drill Field in 2 weeks. It's going to be unreal, bro. Unreal.
Yeah, I'm stoked. I can't wait.
Yeah.
And it's going to be a fun night. It's going to be great.
So we're going to message it every way we can through online mediums and every which way we know to market it on campus. But feel free to spread the word, let people know. Because, again, a couple years ago, I did some interviews with students on campus, lined up interviews with students that would say, I'm not a Christian. And every single one of them, I asked them at some point, have you ever heard of Breakaway? And they all said no, every one of them, which would surprise some people. But I look and go, it is easy in a campus this side to move in and out of this campus for 4 to 5 years and never hear the name Breakaway. And I'm not that concerned if they don't know us. I am concerned if that means they're not hearing the gospel at all, which concerned me about a lot of them. They didn't really have a clear picture of what Christianity is. And so we want to do our part, everything we can, to help facilitate them hearing who Jesus is. Yeah. And so be praying for us September 10th and towards that and moving towards that, because our goal with that is not just to go, oh, look at Breakaway Outdoors, but to say, we want the message to get out to students that would never walk into a basketball arena or walk into the football arena, but they will have no choice but to walk past us. And we want them to stop and hear the name of Jesus. So
yeah, and we would love your help spreading that message. And if you want to see what we're saying about it, if you want to help us spread the message, you can follow us on Twitter at Breakaway Men. We're on Facebook as well, and you can get updates for where we are all semester on our website. That's breakawayministries.org. But before Simpson, we've got one next Tuesday in Reed Arena.
That's right.
And we're excited about it. We can't wait to continue in Exodus. Can't wait to see where you're leading us, Ben, and grateful for your leadership. And so thanks for this time where we get to get a little bit more insight, and thanks for listening. We do count it a privilege that we get to minister to people in this way. And so thanks for tracking along with us, and we'll see you on Tuesday or next week on the podcast.
See ya.